You are about to experience Jackson Snyder Presents. Direct from the Vero Essene Yahad, a Hebrew Nation radio original program. JSP is a variety show seeking out Jewish and Christian origins, religion, theology, and history, and doing so in a fashion that is both educational and entertaining. Welcome to Jackson Snyder Presents.
Here's another essay on the 364-day Jubilee calendar that I found that I think helps explain the succession of calendars in Israel from as far back as we can go until now. It's called On the Biblical Hidden Calendar by Etienne Nodet of the École Biblique, Jerusalem. The Book of Jubilees claims that the secret of the biblical calendar has been lost. It urges a reform and actually uses a solar year of 52 weeks or 364 days, reckoned from morning to morning. The year begins on a Wednesday, and the months are numbered. The reform did occur in some quarters, for it is witnessed by Qumran documents and rabbinic tradition. Besides various scraps of other reckonings, the Bible mainly displays 3 calendar systems, but they are never defined. The first one, which is Canaanite, Phoenician, has named months and only appears by the time of Solomon's temple building. The second, which is almost overwhelming, uses unnamed, numbered months. And the third is the well-known Babylonian lunisolar calendar with named months present in some later books. It's generally assumed that the second one with numbered months was already the Babylonian one and related to King Josiah's reform. We aim at showing that this view is quite doubtful, for this calendar actually is the very one that the Jubilees and subsequent Essene writings display and strive to restore. It's used in both narrative and legal texts, especially in the Pentateuch. We shall see that the calendar of the Reformers, or Covenanters, definitely had a starting point, March 23rd, 156 BC, a very unusual Wednesday with equinox and full moon. However, the solar year is shorter by 1.25 days than the natural cycle of around circa 365.25 days, but the Bible never hints of a permanent way to adjust it, and this was a big challenge for the Reformers. We shall see some reasons to think that this solar calendar, somewhat hidden, is only a literary device which never worked for permanent use in biblical times. Again, some reasons to think that this solar calendar is only a literary device. Well, we'll have to see what his points are on that, because it seems pretty clear to a lot of scholars today that it was indeed used, and a lot earlier than 156 BC. Header: The Calendar of Jubilees and the Bible. In the Babylonian lunisolar calendar, the days are reckoned from evening to evening, for the new moon can only be observed immediately after sunset. This feature can be found in some biblical books that have clear Eastern connections, like in Esther 4:16, a fast of 3 days, nights, and days is ordered. According to Daniel 8:14, the sanctuary will be restored after, quote, 2,300 evenings and mornings, unquote. The same reckoning was used at the Jerusalem temple, since Josephus mentions a place where a priest used to signal by the sound of a trumpet in the afternoon of the approach and on the following evening of the close of every 7th day. However, some Jewish documents, which are deemed to be sectarian, display a different, non-lunar calendar, and claims that the secret of the Torah calendar has been lost and should be recovered. It can be shown first that this very calendar was in use in some quarters, and second, that it lies hidden in the Bible. Rediscovering the solar year. Point 1. The Book of Jubilees was known by some Greek fathers as Little Genesis. The original version is lost, but it mainly survives by an Ethiopian translation titled The Book of the Division of Times. The book rewrites the stories of Genesis with some omissions and changes, and various details from Deuteronomy, that is, Exodus and Deuteronomy, are added. The chronological frame is a kind of solar year of 364 days, that according to Jubilees 6:33 to 38, and the history of the world is computed in Jubilees of 50 years. The days are reckoned from the morning, and the lunar rhythm of the months is ignored. But nothing is said of the adjustments necessary to match the actual natural year. R. Charles dated the work after the Maccabean crisis in the 2nd century BC. The Damascus document, a Hebrew text first discovered sometime before 1900 in the Geniza of a Karaite synagogue of Cairo, cites as an authority this very book of the divisions of times. It states that Israel had corrupted the Sabbaths and festivals and had forgotten the secrets. That would be CD 16, 2 through 4, and CD 13, 14 through 15. A new community called the Covenant has been created or sponsored by a teacher of righteousness, CD 1, 7 through 10. Then, according to CD 3, 18 through 4, 4, it includes priests, Levites, sons of Zadok, and candidates, or literally foreigners. Obviously, this covenant followed the book referred to. The Qumran caves have delivered fragments of these two texts, as well as of many others in which the same calendar is in use. Some calendrical documents from Cave 4 describe the service cycle of the priestly courses and give the dates of the major festivals. The introduction of one text refers to the creation week. That's 4Q 320, 1 through 3, and I quote, "To its being seen from the east to shine in the middle of the heaven at the foundation of creation from evening until morning on the 4th day of the week." Indeed, in Genesis 1:16 we read, "The greater light to rule the day, the lesser light to rule the night," unquote. This means first that it's a day of full moon, and second that any astral calendar starts on the 4th day of creation, not on the 1st. Moreover, every day of that week includes a piece of creation, an evening and a morning. In other words, the days are reckoned from the morning, which cannot match the lunar calendar. Thus, one of the main points of the introduction is to stress that the lunar calendar, which focuses on the new moon, is somewhat unbiblical, in spite of several mentions of the new moon, sometimes parallel to Shabbat as full moon, like in Isaiah 1:13. As for the solar year of 364 days, it is divided into 4 quarters that start on a Wednesday in connection with the solstices and equinoxes. The lunisolar calendar has 2 components. Its main part of 12 months of around 29.5 days and has around 354 days, hence a discrepancy of around 10 days with the solar year, which could be approximately corrected by adding 1 month every 3 years. By the way, I call this lunisolar calendar the calendar of the Sadducees. It was in effect when Yeshua walked the earth, and though the lunisolar calendar was the calendar of the priesthood, it was only the calendar of the priesthood that was in power in Jerusalem, which was a usurping priesthood. I understand that those people of different sects than the Sadducees use their own temple calendars, like the Zadokite calendar used by the Essenes, the Enochian calendar used by the Enochians, just to find the proper feasts. And, of course, the temple was not celebrating these feasts on the correct days, according to the older calendar. So those who kept the older calendars, did not go to the temple, did not eat the temple meats, did not sacrifice in the temple. This in the time of Joshua, and I would put forward that he didn't either. When we find him even in the New Testament, we find him in places like Solomon's porch, which is not in the temple, and another place we find him is in the court of the Gentiles, court of the nations, which is certainly not in the temple. But since early times, going back to the text, the Babylonian astronomers knew that the natural year amounts to 365.25 days, and observed that 235 lunar months are equal to 19 natural years, with an error lesser than 2 hours. Since 19 lunar years make 228 lunar months, an efficient correction in the long range is to have inserted 7 additional months over every 19 lunar years. All right, there's your lunisolar year calendar, which appears to me to be a real mess. The text continues, as for the Jubilee calendar, the year lacks 1.25 days to match the natural year, so that discrepancy with nature grows quickly. In order to keep the rhythm of the weeks in the beginning of the year on a Wednesday, it's necessary to add a week from time to time. An easy calculation shows that the shortest possible period to fix the discrepancy is 28 years, during which 5 weeks must have been added. Thus, if the first day of the first month falls on a Wednesday of a full moon, the same conjunction will occur 28 years later, but never before. I have a comment. There is a simple way to work that out, which I have talked about umpteen times. That is simply to set the year by the equinox plus the next Wednesday each year. Then you never have that problem. As long as it's connected to the equinox in some way, and each year that connection is maintained, you should never have to have any intercalation. We should never have to add any days, months, or years. Back to the text. Now, a proof that this system has worked is provided by the rabbinic blessing of the sun, which invokes creation and has to be performed every 28 years at sunrise, facing east. It falls on one Wednesday morning that is supposed to be the vernal equinox. Such a custom cannot be surprising, since a significant part of the rabbinic tradition has come from the Essenes. However, the year of 365.25 days, which was enforced in Rome by Caesar in 45 BC, does not match exactly the tropical year. After being used for centuries, it was discovered that it is too long by about 0.75 days per century, which was the root of the Gregorian reform in 1582, with a tropical year of 365.2468 days. But since the correction was intended to refer to Constantine's time and not Caesar's, only 10 days were dropped instead of 14. Of course, the Jewish blessing has ignored that reform and sticks to the Babylonian astral year of 365.25 days. In 2009, it occurred on Wednesday, April 8th, more than 16 days after the true astral equinox. Since the calculated equinox moves ahead of the tropical one by about 3 days every 400 years, a simple calculation allows us to go back to the starting point of the custom, which was on Wednesday, March 23rd, 156 BC, when the astronomical instant of the equinox happened to be very close to the instant of the full moon. We may conjecture that the Babylonian astronomers were aware that this very rare phenomenon, which occurs in average less than twice per millennium, such was the beginning of the first cycle of the blessing. The useful conclusion here is that the reformers, Essenes or the like, can hardly have surfaced earlier. In spite of this interesting testimony, we do not know whether the solar calendar was adjusted this way by all the sectarian groups, Besides the 28-year device, another possibility was at hand, namely to add 1 or 2 days every year, that is, to have one longer week with blank days. Here we have the concept of the non-day. In this scholar's work, he calls those blank days. I knew that I had read about that. Such a method did exist. The old Egyptian calendar had 12 months of 30 days and 5 epigomenal days, and 5 epigomenal days were added at the end without paying attention to weeks. So, speaking of the Egyptian calendar, 12 months of 30 days, then tagged on 5 non-days at the end. Some sectarian texts suggest a correction of this kind. The corruption of the Sabbaths and festivals cited above points to a calendar problem in both cases and not to the details of the rites. I guess that means the festivals. According to CD 10, 14 through 17, any work should be interrupted on Friday before sunset, which is not a dissident view, but in 3, 12 through 16 of CD, it said, the Sabbath belongs to the hidden things, which suggests that it had to follow a calendrical decision. An obscure passage of 1 Enoch can be understood this way. In 74:12, we read, quote, the sun and the stars bring in all the year exactly, so that they do not advance or delay their position by a single day. This shows that there was a corrective system, which is supposed to have worked. Another hint is given in Jubilees 50, 1 through 5. The Jubilee falls on the 50th year after the 7th sabbatical year, and then a new cycle begins. So the rhythm of the 7th years is broken by the insertion of a blank Jubilee year. A non-year? This may suggest a similar feature for the rhythm of the 7th days. In fact, the documents using this calendar split into 2 categories. The first one includes texts presenting it as a whole, like in Jubilees, Enoch, 4Q209, or 4QMMT. They only consider the first year, that is, the creation year. The second is a collection of texts giving details on the priestly courses with references to the lunar phases. But their meaning isn't clear, for they have been poorly preserved. They may reflect either a permanent order or dispositions for a specific period. I think he's talking about Mishmarot there. Recent studies show that they most probably were a perpetual system, but in an ideological way. The lunar months were adjusted to exactly 3 solar years, so that the Sabbaths were preserved, but the observation of the phases of the moon shifted by half a day every 3 years, or 1 month every 177 years. With the natural tropical dating, we obtain a shift of some 125 days every 100 years. Such a difference is by no means impossible, for we know that some ancient calendars got quite unconnected with nature. The Julian reform was enforced in Rome on the 1st of January 45 BC, but in order to fix it properly, 96 days had to be inserted into the previous year. In Egypt, the official solar year had 365.25 days since many centuries, and in 238 BC, when Ptolemy III tried to introduce the tropical year, brought in by Alexander, his decree explained the reform by saying that the winter feasts were falling in summer, and conversely. To sum up, the lost solar calendar that the sectarian documents wanted to restore was obviously quite hidden. For the calendrical documents that depend on it are either cumbersome or unconnected with nature. Some attempts were actually made, but there is no reason to assume that there was only one school. The root of the problem is simple. On the 4th day of the creation week, a full moon occurred, and the duration of light and darkness was supposed to be equal. Equinox. Hence, a dream to fix a calendar that would renew this conjunction every year, but after a short period, either the weeks or the months or the seasons get necessarily distorted. That's the end of point 1. Point 2. A biblical calendar, both hidden and virtual. At the beginning of the study of the Qumran documents, when the solar calendar of the Jubilees was not yet seriously considered, a calendrical problem surfaced. The date of Pentecost was consistently on Sunday, the 15th of the third month, according to numerous references. This major festival included a renewal of the Sinai covenant and the admission of neophytes. This according to 1 QS, I think that's Serek, 1:16 through 2:31. According to Leviticus 23, 15 to 16, it occurs on the day following the end of the 7 full weeks, which are counted from, quote, the day after the Shabbat, unquote, identified with the day of the wave offering of the barley sheaf, first fruits. So, if Pentecost occurs on the 15th day of the third month, the 7 weeks begin on Sunday, first month, 26th day. But for the mainstream Jewish custom, this Sabbath was the very day of Passover, first month, 15th day, according to the ancient meaning of the word, as found in Deuteronomy 5 and 12, verse 15. So the 7 weeks are counted from first month, 16th day. The discrepancy could be solved thanks to a Persian writer, al-Biruni, of the 11th century. Cat, will you go away? In a book on astronomy and calendars, he mentions a Jewish sect that was called Makarada, cave dwellers in Arabic, because its documents were found in Qumran caves around the 7th century. Well, I've had enough of that. Meow. They demand that the year begin on a Wednesday. In this case, the problem disappears, since the 26th of the first month always falls on the Sunday that follows the week of unleavened bread. So the Covenanters were using the calendar of the Jubilees, which was confirmed later by other documents as stated above. Al-Biruni adds that for the Magariyah, the beginning of the first month is a Wednesday of full moon. Of course, this can't be true every year, but understood of the creation week, it is clear on the first Wednesday, that is, the first day of the very first calendrical year, the lesser luminary was a full moon. It seems that al-Biruni was aware of a general introduction like the one of 4Q320 quoted above. Then came A. Jobert, whose starting point was the statement defining this calendar as a lost biblical feature. She proceeded to look for signs of such a calendar in 2 directions, in the Bible and in early church writings. The event in the biblical narratives are less often dated than in Jubilees, but for the ones given with numbered, unnamed months, the pattern works, especially for the Hexateuch and Ezekiel. Nothing occurs on a Sabbath, and the main dated events occur on special days, Sunday, Wednesday, and Friday. This general view has been accepted by biblical scholars, but with definite reservations for the special days displayed in Jubilees. Incidentally, the common biblical word for month, of which the natural meaning is novelty, that is, new moon, any other meaning is a distortion.
Important note.
Except I understand from my own searching that just about every place that is translated into English as new moon doesn't say new moon. It actually just says new, which is an adjective, and after that a noun is supposed, with the redactors of the Hebrew to English, giving that unknown noun the word moon, when it probably should be month instead of moon.
You may contact us at Jackson Snyder Presents at this email address, veroyahad@gmail.com. That is veroyahad@gmail.com. And let me remind you, you are listening to Jackson Snyder Presents with your host tonight, Bogdan G. Schruumkoff. thank you for listening. We'll be right back. Jackson Snyder Present is back. Join us now for more of this interesting discussion.
So I guess another way you could relate every place where the English says new moon, it probably should say new month, and that's probably in the entire Pentateuch. Jaubert's hypothesis of a solar year hidden in the New Testament can be strengthened by some legal aspects. The creation week, discussed above, launches a non-lunar calendar. As for the definition of the days of the cultic calendar, they begin in the morning. The Passover lamb must be slaughtered on the 14th of the first month and eaten in the evening, and the Israelites were brought out from Egypt, quote, that very day, unquote, that is, the night of the same 14th, according to Exodus 12 and 6.17. The Day of Atonement falls on the 10th of the 7th month, but it begins on the eve of the 9th day. This implies a reckoning of the days from the morning, for otherwise it would start one day before. Leviticus 23:32. According to Leviticus 22:29 and following, the sacrifices of thanksgiving shall be eaten on the same day without leaving any of it until the morning. So the day includes the following night. Indeed, this was the rule at the Jerusalem temple. In spite of the use of the Babylonian reckoning for the Sabbath, any cleansing has to be performed by daylight, and it takes effect after the sunset of the same day. Numbers 19:7. Thus, a useful conclusion can be drawn. The same Jubilee calendar is used in the biblical narratives as well as in the laws. Its two salient features are the reckoning of the days from the morning and the importance of the full moon. However, we don't know whether or how it actually worked, especially for the feasts, because of the inconsistency of the time cycles, that is, week, natural lunar months, seasons. At first glance, it can hardly be reconciled with the Babylonian lunar solar calendar, with its named new moons and the reckonings from the evening. So, the various calendars used in the Bible have to be considered. And the next point that is topic is number 2, Roman numeral 2, the actual biblical calendars. We can see in the Bible 3 main calendrical systems that seem to be in succession. At the beginning of the Passover narrative, we hear of a change of the beginning of the year. Exodus 12, 1 through 2. But otherwise, they're never defined. So a special attention has to be paid to the transitions between them, between the calendars. Point 1 is about Solomon's temple, calendar 1. In the Bible, from the primeval stories until the last kings, only numbered anonymous months are used. However, a specific period stands out, for special month names appear in dates connected with the building of Solomon's temple. The works began in the month of Ziv, 1 Kings 6:37, and were completed on the month of Bul, that is the 8th month. The dedication took place on the month of Ethanim, 1 Kings 8:2. The Masoretic text adds a gloss. It is the 7th month during the feast, unquote. The month names are Canaanite, Phoenician, and in the Bible, this is the only case of the use of Yerach for dating purposes. Of course, that word means moon. Elsewhere, it only indicates a period of around 30 days, a month. So they're saying, again, Yerach is not in there except one place, and that has to do with Solomon's temple. And that lends a little more credence to the fact that the Hebrew word Kodesh, or new, stands alone in the rest of those passages. There is no new moon, Yerach. So it seems to me that instead of having the Masoretes put moon in there for their own purposes, it really should be new month. In the temple story, we don't know whether Yorach indicates a month as a period or the first day of the month, which would give a precise dating. We can only suggest that the very word Yorach, meaning moon, could have referred to a full moon. For the month Ethanim, the connection made by the Masoretic text with the feasts of the booths could imply what plainly means on the full moon day of Ethanim. Incidentally, Solomon's Phoenician connection was strong, as suggested by 1 Kings 5:15 of the Septuagint, and Hiram sent his servants to anoint Solomon in place of his father. Hiram's influence had already surfaced in another context. After David had conquered Jerusalem, Jebus, and settled in the stronghold, it's reported that he went on and became great. Then Hiram, king of Tyre, sent him messengers, workers, and materials, and they built a house for him. The conclusion is remarkable, 2 Samuel 5:12. So David knew that Yahweh had established him as king over Israel, unquote. This is the same pattern as the relationship between Hiram and Solomon, and both passages shed some light over one another. The next question is to determine how long such a calendar could have been in use. We may observe that after the discovery of the Book of the Law, quote, Book of the Torah, unquote, in the temple, King Josiah proceeds to cultic reforms and celebrates a Passover that had not been kept, quote, since the days of the judges who judged Israel and during all the days of the kings of Israel and the kings of Yehudah, 2 Kings 23:22. This may imply that Solomon's calendar was in use during all that period. Josiah's Passover is performed according to the Book of the Covenant, a clear reference to the Book of the Covenant that Moses read in the hearing of the people in the desert, Exodus 24:7. However, we do not know if Josiah made any calendar reform, for according to Nehemiah 8:17, the Feast of the Booths that follows the reading of the Law of Moses by Ezra revives a rite lost, quote, since the days of Joshua, son of Nun, unquote. And that's the end of what we have here on Solomon's calendar. And we'll go on to the numbered anonymous months, or calendar 2. According to a received opinion, this new calendar, that is the numbered calendar with anonymous months, calendar 2, would have surfaced in Yehudah in the footsteps of Josiah's reform, itself prompted by the discovery of Deuteronomy in the 18th year of his reign in 622 BC, according to 2 Kings 22:8. It would have actually been the Babylonian lunisolar calendar, the month names being omitted because they were taken from idols. It would have been introduced in Judah before the fall of Jerusalem in 587, and probably after 604, when the Egyptians were defeated at Carchemish, and the Babylonian dominion spread over the whole of Syria-Palestine. It was the golden age of Babylonian astronomy. From that time on, the months are numbered, as it can be seen with the dates under Jehoiakim and Zedekiah, the last kings, Jeremiah 36:9 and 52:12. And the beginning of the year would have been put in spring, Exodus 12:2. Moreover, the weekly Sabbath would have replaced the previous one, that is the full moon Sabbath. Such would be the lunisolar calendar, which would have framed later the priestly ritual laws. This set of views is difficult to hold, at least out of two reasons. First, it implies a major change at the end of the 7th century, of which no definite traces can be found in the Bible. Second, it collides head-on with the conclusions above on the lost biblical calendar, which I'm assuming he's talking about the Jubilees or the Zadokite calendar, colliding head-on. From a literary perspective, the Josiah reform is clearly linked to Deuteronomy, as it has been observed since 2 centuries. But the problem is to make sure that the connections reflect historical facts. Besides the calendrical intricacies, 4 further remarks indicate that this is very doubtful. Number 1. Deuteronomy, with a mention of Mount Ebal and Gerizim, is oriented toward Shechem and its surroundings, that is, the chosen place, while the Deuteronomistic history of the monarchy from Samuel to 2 Kings focuses on Benjamin, Judah, and Jerusalem. In fact, the Samaritans of Shechem should be held as Israelites of old, in spite of the Judean version of their origin found in 2 Kings 17 of the Masoretic text, and the traditions reported by Josephus in Antiquities of the Jews 11, 317 to 347. 2. According to Nehemiah 13, 1 through 3, the returnees from exile had discovered Deuteronomy in Jerusalem under Artaxerxes, a Persian king. The implied problem is to determine how this book reached Judah. 3. During the Maccabean crisis, 2 Maccabees 5:22 and 6:1 through 3 reports that our nation was persecuted by King Antiochus IV, who sent officials to harm symmetrically the temples of Jerusalem and Gerizim. Apparently, such a wording hardly matches the Deuteronomistic rule of one chosen place, but its being unnamed may have allowed some flexibility. In short, we can't say anything definite about the Josian reform, and even less on any calendar change in that time, beyond a possible flexibility. Incidentally, we may observe that the Babylonian calendar did reach the country several years before Josiah and the Carchemish battle. 2 contracts have been found in Gezer, written in cuneiform, dated 651 and 649 BC, with Babylonian month names. A letter from the 7th century, written in Hebrew and using the same lunar calendar, has been unearthed at the stronghold Mezad Hashavyahu near Ashdod. A kind of calendar change is ordered before the Passover of Egypt, Exodus 12:2, and I quote, "This month shall be for you the head of the months," unquote. In this sentence, the word month can be understood either as new moon or as month in a general meaning. Later on it said, in the laws of the unleavened bread in Exodus 13:4, "Today," and I quote, "you are going forth from Egypt," unquote. The context is different from Deuteronomy 16, and here the plain meaning of the Hebrew phrase is, "on the new moon day of the barley ears," unquote. In fact, the exit from Egypt occurred by full darkness, and in parentheses here, a new moon, Exodus 12:29, following the 9th and 10th plagues, and not by the light of a full moon. Read that again. In fact, the exit from Egypt occurred by full darkness, following the 9th and 10th plagues, and not by the light of a full moon. In other words, the beginning of that month was a full moon, so that the calendar of the creation week surfaces again, at least in a literary way, so the calendar change has to be understood with, I think, Kodesh indicating a month and not a new moon. Thank you. As for the change itself, the old agrarian definition of the 3 main feasts provides a clue. They are expounded in Exodus 23, 14 through 17, and 34, 18 through 23 in similar words. Passover is not mentioned, but the exit from Egypt is recalled with the unleavened bread, and with the same date as in Exodus 13:4, thus with the same meaning. The Feast of the Ingathering is, quote, at the end of the year, unquote, Exodus 23:16, or, quote, at the change of the year, Exodus 34:22, or, in the Septuagint, in the middle of the year, a correction that takes into account the change of Exodus 12:2. This doesn't properly square with the date of the booths on the 15th of the 7th month, but there may be an allusion to a full moon of the solar calendar, or conversely, the Feast of Booths of Nehemiah 8:13 through 17 seems to begin quite early in that month. Well, if you can follow this, you're doing good. Whatever may be the precise calendar referred to, the change was to move the beginning of the festal year from fall to spring. We don't know the origin of the previous calendar. It may have been Canaanite, for a calendrical inscription of the 11th century found at Gezer gives a list of months which are defined as agrarian period. By the way, our essayist says that Gezer gives a list of months, but again, the word there is yirach, which means moons. Now he's saying moons means months. The first line reads 2 months of ingathering, so that the year begins in fall, at least in this case. Since it runs according to nature, it seems to be solar, and the month may depend quite loosely on the moon phases, as is the early Egyptian system. And that's the end of the essayist's description of the numbered anonymous months calendar 2. And now we go on to point 3, the Babylonian named months or calendar 3. These months, whose names are witnessed since the 17th century BC, are infrequently used in the Hebrew Bible and only in later books. 11 times in Esther, often together with the number of the month, with the year starting in spring, that is, Esther 3:7, the first month, which is the month of Nisan, and the 11th month, which is the month of Adar, quoting there from Esther. Once in Ezra 6:15, apparently from an Aramaic inscription mentioning the completion of the temple work. 3 times in Nehemiah, in 1:1 and 2:1, where Kislev precedes Nisan in the same 20th year of Artaxerxes, which implies that the year has begun in fall, somewhat unexpectedly. In 6:15, quote, the wall was completed on the 25th day of the month of Elul in 52 days, unquote. Then twice in Zechariah's oracles, 1:7 reads, on the 24th day of the 11th month, which is the month of Shebat, Shebat, in the second year of Darius, with an interesting error, since Shebat is the 10th month. Zechariah 7:1 has, in the 4th year of Darius, on the 4th of the 9th month in Kislev, and the equivalence is accurate with the beginning of the year in spring. This book doesn't have Eastern ties, and among several dates in numbered months, these 2 Babylonian names are generally understood as glosses, that is, right-overs. The discrepancy indicated may be due either to a simple mistake or to an intercalary month between the 2nd and the 4th years of Darius. After the fall of the Persian Empire and Alexander's death, the new king of Syria, Seleucus I, ordered to keep the same calendar, but the months received Macedonian names. Nisan became Artemisius, and so on. Moreover, the beginning of the year was shifted close to the autumnal equinox, so that the Seleucid era started in Hyperboreteus, or Tishri, 312 BC. At Antioch, this beginning of the year was kept when the Julian calendar was enforced. For the sake of completeness, it should be added that the various biblical details hint at other calendars or calendrical changes. For instance, some passages refer to the Penance Day of Atonement, which is a Shabbat par excellence, falling on the 10th of the 7th month, according to Leviticus 23:27. But according to Leviticus 25, 8 through 10, the Jubilee year begins on that very day, and the first 9 days are somewhat blank, non-days. A statement to the same effect is found in Ezra 40:1 of the Masoretic text. No, that can't be Ezra. That's got to be Ezekiel. Ezra doesn't have a 40th chapter, so their abbreviation EZ got to be speaking of Ezekiel. And I quote, at the beginning of the year on the 10th day of the month, unquote, a Tanaitic saying reports an ancient custom. Quote, on the Day of Atonement, the daughters of Jerusalem used to go out and dance in the vineyards, unquote. The penance day may have had some flexibility, but see too Nehemiah 9:1. And that's the rest of what it has on the Babylonian named months calendar 3. So here we are on the conclusion of the entire essay. If you've stuck in this far, you deserve a prize. 13 golden emeralds for you. Conclusion. The lost biblical calendar of the Covenanters can be detected in the narratives and in the laws. It ideally starts on the Wednesday of the creation week with full moon and equinox. The days run from morning to morning and the months are anonymous. It seems to have been a mere literary device, for it alters the plain meaning of, and here is a Hebrew word that's messed up in the text. Moreover, nothing is said of its enforcement or actual functioning. Such a frame has an Egyptian flavor, for it has nothing to do with the Babylonian calendar, and the view that a major change is introduced on the footsteps of Josiah's reform can hardly be substantiated. However, the biblical calendar as it stands with unnamed months was used in various circumstances. For the ritual cycle, it's worked reasonably well with the lunisolar interpretation, as suggested by the glosses in Zechariah 1:7 and 7:1. In the 2nd century BCE, the sectarian reformers strove to restore its actual form and were successful to some extent. It's perhaps significant that the reference date of the reform, that is Wednesday, March 23rd, minus 156, falls within the 7-year period when there was no high priest in Jerusalem between Alchemus and Jonathan. That would be 59 through 52 BC. And here's a PS summary as well. The Cairo document, that's what they call the CD or the Damascus rule. Now they call it the Cairo document because of where it was found in the Geniza there of the ancient Cairo synagogue of the Karaites. The Cairo document claims that Israel has lost the true biblical calendar, but a new community called the Covenant has been able to restore it. A book of the division of times, Jubilees, is cited as an authority. It displays a solar calendar of 52 weeks or 364 days. The year begins on a Wednesday of full moon and equinox, and the days are reckoned from the morning. This matches the creation week and most biblical dates with numbered unnamed months. However, the natural year contains about 365.25 days, but since nothing is said of the necessary adjustment for perpetual system, we conclude that it was just a literary device, somewhat hidden. The Covenanters were able to restore it in awkward ways. The starting point was on Wednesday, March 23rd, 156 BC, with equinox and full moon, an exceptional occurrence. And I just want to add a touch to that. This would not be nearly so hard to figure out with the evidence that we have if the Covenanters or we who use this calendar would simply set up the first day of the year based on the equinox each year. If we were to do that, we wouldn't have to worry about intercalation at all if we understood what the non-day is that is spoken of in here. That would make it easier. But if each new year, when equinox comes, if you go to your Wednesday after equinox every year, not only would there not be any intercalation ever needed, but you can project these years out for as long as you want to without a whole lot of problem. So there is the essay on the biblical hidden calendar. You have been listening to Jackson Snyder Presents on Hebrew Nation Radio.